Well, as a very newly ordained rabbi in the Humanistic Jewish movement, it is of course a tall order to speak about the future of Jewish peoplehood. In our movement, rabbis are not diviners, and we don't make any claim to prophetic vision or omniscience. The scary truth about the future of Jewish peoplehood, as with any future, is that it is ultimately unknowable. Having said that, we're here to discuss not just our predictions, but our hopes and aspirations for Jews, both within and without our movement. My topic is a cultural Judaism for a multicultural world. As we celebrate 50 years of humanistic Judaism grounded in congregational life, it is useful to pause and reflect on our past, our present, and our possibilities. Sherwin Warren began the Birmingham Temple out of an awareness that many Jews, like him, felt very strongly Jewish culturally, but lacked religious devotion. He was not the first to draw a distinction between Jewish religion and culture, but he was perhaps the first to give cultural Judaism a congregational home. It is not as though 50 years later, Jews and others unanimously agree that Judaism is or can be a culture independent of religion, and those that do often find the line between Judaism as a religion and as a culture to be blurry. Why does this matter? Because when we consider the permutations of culture, what it is, how it works, and what it means to people, we are forced to ask about the sustainability of Judaism as culture. And this becomes increasingly difficult because when we use a word like culture, we mean many different things. Many of us describe being Jewish as our cultural identity. Identity is one aspect of culture, and for us, I think is the richest. There is no doubt in my mind that I'm fully, authentically, and proudly Jewish. I'm delighted by Jewish traditions, celebrations, and texts, and I participate actively in Jewish life. Many of you in this room are just like me. The challenge with identities is that they are multiple, they're ephemeral, and they're slippery. Being Jewish is an important aspect of my identity, but there are many other aspects that are also important. Being a partner to my husband, a daughter to my parents, and sister to my brothers, an expectant mother are important. Being a woman and a strong feminist are important. Being an educator, someone who values teaching and learning, matters to me. We find that we are made of multiple selves, and normally these can coexist. But what about when they're in conflict? Jewish women, for example, have sometimes left Judaism because their feminism made it hard for them to accept Jewish-mandated inequality. Jews who intermarry often feel pushed out of Jewish life, should they choose between their cultural identity or the person they fell in love with. Those who value education may struggle with the half-truths and misconceptions that mainstream Judaism perpetuates, such as the story of creation, the idea of a divinely inspired Bible, or the historicity of our holidays. It is particularly because our cultural identities are so deeply rooted that some of these conflicts are so fraught. The good news is that our humanistic Jewish communities and institutions offer people a way to reconcile their multiple selves. With us, one can be a Jewish feminist. One can have their intermarriage and their Judaism too. One can be the kind of educator that promotes critical thinking and is unafraid of any question. We empower ourselves and each other to live authentically in our Jewish as well as our civil lives. The bad news is that for every gain, there's a cost. We can enjoy the benefits of being able to have our Judaism, but retain our individualities, our other and sometimes competing identities, but that means that in our communities, we may often disagree. The fact is that what I mean by cultural Judaism may be very different to what a secular Jew in Tel Aviv means, which differs still from a Jew who expresses their Jewishness mainly through their Jewish fraternity, their bagel brunches, or their Woody Allen film festivals. Because there are many iterations of any cultural identity, including a Jewish cultural identity, our brand of cultural Judaism does not work to attract large numbers of cultural Jews. We're working on it, but this is our challenge. When we speak about culture, we are also sometimes speaking of cultural output. Often this is cultural identity as expressed through the arts, as Sivan showed us. When a person is deemed cultured, it's because they have familiarity and facility with the arts, with the ideas of the intellectual elite, and with the narratives of the literati. Jewish culture, in terms of cultural output and the arts, is pervasive and rich, and this is wonderful. Excuse me. Again, we have good news and bad news. The good news is that we are affirmed in our beliefs when we look at Jewish culture as reflected and refracted through literature, film, music, and theater. The stories told by Woody Allen, Mordechai Richler, Leonard Cohen, and many, many others are deeply Jewish and often deeply secular. We do not have to look very far to see that cultural Judaism is alive and well. Jewish culture encodes and perpetuates it. The bad news is that because of the wide availability, excellent quality, and emotional depth of these Jewish cultural resources, some cultural Jews may find that they don't need us. People tell me that they are sustained, inspired, and affirmed by the secular Jewish culture in their cities. I live in Toronto, where it's possible to see a Jewish film, play, concert, reading, or other cultural event at least weekly. What is our draw when the stories of cultural Jews are not uniquely ours, but are available to and belong to the broader community as well? This is another challenge. When we say culture, we also mean subgroup, those with a distinct set of norms and practices. Many of those in our communities and those we'd like to reach are part of numerous subgroups. Multiculturalism used to evoke an idea that there were many cultures coming together in one space. Canada, where I'm from, has a strong policy of multiculturalism that asserts that people need not be Canadian or another ethnicity, but that many different cultures can be celebrated as part of the Canadian mosaic. But this brand of multiculturalism has nothing to do with the subgroups and cultural elements that are increasingly more important to people's day-to-day lives. What of youth culture? What of the culture of the internet and social media? What of crafters, queer culture, environmentalists, or foodies? These subcultures are often more relevant and meaningful to people than their Jewish culture. What of these multiculturalisms that have nothing to do with ethnicity? It's not just our societies that are multicultural, but we ourselves, who manage and participate in many cultural affiliations every day. The good news is that Humanistic Judaism is an effective subculture, and that we offer people community, shared beliefs, values, and practices, and when we're doing it right, we offer a good time. The bad news is that people are busy, overextended, and exhausted. There are numerous studies documenting that in the information age, people are losing our ability to prioritize. We get so much information and are so overloaded with activities that we sometimes have to focus too much on what has to get done and not nearly enough on why we're doing it. As education director of a secular Jewish Sunday school, I used to speak with parents about how they wanted their kids to get a Jewish education, but it was hard, what with hockey practices, ski weekends, birthday parties, and violin recitals. And I get that. These are important aspects of these kids' schedules. These are the subcultures that are meaningful to them. And when we have lots and lots of commitments and opportunities, it does become difficult to prioritize. I often said to these parents that it was my hope that their child would have an amazing childhood, but also my hope and my hunch that when they got older, it would not be their life as a hockey player or skier or violin player that mattered to them nearly as much as their life as a Jew. Our activities are often fleeting, but our identities long-lasting. But it's hard to make people see that their subcultures should be subordinate to their Jewish culture. These challenges are real. We're faced with the same struggles as all Jewish institutions: aging and declining membership, a shift away from congregational models, Many cultural groups and programs competing for people's time and attention. And of course, we can do better. However, in spite of the very real challenges we face, I think it's essential to operate from a place of hope and happiness. Recently, in an article from The Forward, the question was asked, why would Jews want to hold on to such a particularist identity in a multicultural world? And here's my answer. In spite of the challenges of competing cultural identities, of our various subcultures, and of the draw of the arts as a replacement for the cultural community we can offer, in spite of the myriad ways it is possible to be a cultural Jew without belonging to the humanistic Jewish movement, what we have, what we do, and what we are is meaningful and special. Our leaders and members often celebrate that humanistic Judaism is rational Judaism because we dispense with magic, with the intangible, and with fantasy. I value the critical approach humanistic Jews possess, but as the newest rabbi ordained in our movement, I want to make a startling admission. I see very little that is rational about being Jewish, and I value greatly the magical, the intangible, and the fantastical. All of my remarks above point to one thing. We are here in spite of the fact that we know we don't need to be here. There is nothing forcing us to express our Jewish identities in institutions or in community. We do it because we love it and we're sustained by it. There's absolutely no reason why being Jewish is still relevant in a multicultural world. It is the emotional and spiritual attachments to being culturally Jewish that matter, and being culturally Jewish within the context of a humanistic Judaism, which offers the traditions, practices, and celebrations of a long-standing people, but also offers freedom and flexibility that matter to us. These emotional and spiritual needs run much deeper and are much more meaningful than reason itself. I've spent much of my academic career and have much interest in my increasingly Jewish career in exploring the politics of what I call longing and belonging. I look around, and in spite of all of the cultural artifacts and subcultures and activities available to people, there's emptiness. We are searching for truth and meaning. This is what humanistic Judaism offers, not the kind of truth and meaning that are external to humanity, that come from belief in a higher power. Instead, we affirm that we are at our best when we live our own truth and find within ourselves intrinsic meaning. This is a beautiful and necessary message for our harsh times. That longing for depth and meaning is coupled with a real yearning for belonging. I strongly feel that people have more ways to connect and even spend more time interacting with others than ever before, yet we've never been more lonely. Culture relies on community, and the depth of community we offer is more than in any meetup or Facebook group, more than we share with the person beside us at a film or theater event. And what of the magical, the intangible, and the fantastical? I'm thinking of the magic of how, as Sivan and others have said this weekend, a candle lends its light to another, but stays just as strong. I'm thinking of the magic moment when a group of kids in one of our Sunday schools sings a Jewish song in unison, of those times when I've been moved by one of our rabbi's inspiring words. The intangible is the moment when a woman thanks me profusely for creating a memorial for her very anti-religious dad that allowed his life to be celebrated on his terms, that the integrity he had in life was mirrored in the way we honored his death. I'm thinking of the moment I see a congregant reach out to another who's in mourning or who's celebrating. I'm thinking of the wit and humor that crop up as we meet to discuss board business, fundraising, or event planning. These things are nebulous, hard to define, but essential. And the fantastical? We live our fullest lives when we immerse ourselves in possibility. I love how we sometimes imagine an event and then make it happen. We want communities where we can live authentically, so we create them. Humanistic Jews have been turning fantasy into reality for 50 years, and this we should celebrate. Why hold on to a particularist Jewish identity in a multicultural world? Because in a multicultural world, we affirm that culture matters. To have a particular cultural identity is ironically not in contrast to having a pluralistic outlook. We are one small but important aspect of any society's cultural mosaic. Cultural or humanistic Judaism is well poised to handle the ever-changing landscape of multiculturalism, including all of the iterations of culture we experience. We are here because of our own stories of longing and belonging. And many of us feel that when we are in community with one another, as we are now, we are home.